Echoes of an Exorcism. A story written by nmwrites. Part 3. Last night, I came home and someone was in my house. I yelled and called the police, but they escaped through a window before the police arrived. While cleaning up after, I found a third letter. And now I don't think I'm safe here anymore. Whoever or whatever broke in was looking for it, and I think they will be back. Lovely Dana, have you realized it yet? Do you sense the foolish mistakes of my youth? Do you realize I cursed them all? We are in the dark woods now, my child, lost and far from home. Of course we have been. We did not suddenly become lost. We were not dropped here. Still, there is a deep fear that comes with realizing. I ran through the house towards the screams, instinctively knowing which way the echoes bounced from the stone walls, racing, until I found myself at the entrance to the deep basements below the manor. There, I found Ashley standing over Jack, knife in her hand, poised to kill him. I cannot explain what I thought in that moment. The scene before me made no sense, but I had to protect Jack. I threw myself at Ashley, knocking her to the ground, the knife she used spinning wildly away into the dark. She shrieked like an animal fighting for freedom, telling me I was making a mistake. Oh, I had made a mistake. I didn't even see Jack as he approached, but I caught a glint of the knife as he thrust it into Ashley's body again and again and again. Whatever he had become, smiled at me and laughed, a stifled laugh, but one still full of malice, the noise I had heard twice before. He leaned forward menacingly. Tell Pierre I've been looking for him for a long time. He'll remember why. Tell him where I'm waiting for him. Shouts rang out from the stairwell behind us, and Jack melted into the basement, moving in a manner both unnatural and terrifying, as though his entire body was walking in one direction, but his head faced another. Daddy appeared as I sobbed, and his face when I screamed that Jack killed Ashley did not register surprise, but sadness. Henry stood behind him with the doctor and Father Pierre. Even Mr. Hawks stood nearby. Henry had woken in the mayhem and had immediately told Daddy the truth of the night with Ashley. Just not in time. The truth of how he found Jack performing some ritual on Ashley. How Jack flew into a rage and attacked. Now standing before me and Ashley's body, Daddy realized his losses included both a daughter and a son. He knows Father Pierre, I cried. He says he has looked for him for a long time. The priest's face blanched, and I knew he remembered whatever darkness they now faced. Some old battle in a land with a name so old it had been lost. But some things do not forget. The men readied themselves with weapons, and Daddy told me to find a place to hide, that he would fetch me when it ended. I ran then, ran like I had never run before, as though I might reach a place where none of those awful events had happened, and tucked myself beneath the cabinets near the kitchen, slipped into a dark place too small for anyone but a young girl. I heard screams, and shouts and gunfire. Smelled smoke and felt doors slam nearby. I heard Jack too, heard him as he crawled out of the basement and stalked from room to room, hunting. I heard him calling my name, heard him demanding others tell him where I hid as they died. None knew though. A young girl has ways of becoming invisible, and I waited. His footsteps still echoed the hallways, and he sang the old lullaby to me, but in a mocking and grotesque tone. In time, the house grew cold and silent, and I could see sunlight peeking through the cabinet doors. Still, I waited. Hours passed before the voices appeared, loud, hard voices, and the heavy footsteps of men moving in unison. The train broke through the snow that morning, reaching a station with a group of soldiers from the barracks who had been prevented from returning to town for weeks, stranded while traveling down out of the mountains for provisions. Jack stood alone on the platform to greet them, waving goodbye as they set out to find why the town seemed so empty. While they encountered a horror they could not understand, he simply boarded the train and rode off to another place. The town stood in shambles. House doors stood open. The residents inside butchered mercilessly. They assumed a pack of wolves had fallen on the town, and they searched for hours looking for survivors. In the end, they only found one. A young girl crouched inside a small cabinet, telling a tale of a demon who looked like her brother. Things happened very quickly for me after that. Without relatives living in the country, they sent me across the ocean to live with my aunt and uncle. And as I watched my homeland melt into the horizon, I swore I would never return. Let the monster in Jack's skin rot. I would not lay eyes on it or that land again. Years passed, my dear. My aunt and uncle were wonderful and raised me well. My cousins became my siblings, and many days I imagined I had been born here, that the nightmares I left behind were just that, something I had woken from and allowed to fade. I grew. I met your grandfather and had your father. I built a proud life. I remember the day your mother and father died while driving your grandfather into town. The police officers were kind. They drove to the hospital at a speed that made me think we might start flying, only to learn that none of them had survived. They could not explain why his car had flown off that embankment, only guessing that some animal must have run in front of them. A tragic accident. I stood in that room in shock, clutching you, just a child, to my chest. I shook with what they assumed was grief. It would be hours before I could communicate the noises that I heard. How outside the room, where I had received such horrible news, I had heard an angry, stifled laugh. We moved again, sweetheart, you and me. I didn't trust what I heard, but I remained unwilling to take any chances with you. I did the best I could raising you, and your parents would be so proud. Even if I can't remember much at the end, I can remember how they looked at you with such love. They still would. We did all right, you and I. The world still manages to be kind to widows and orphans. we've moved on. Most days, I convinced myself I hadn't really heard it. It happened the last time you visited, so many decades after I had stopped straining for the sound of it. You had left, and I made my way out to the common room so I could see you walking to your car. You never knew I did that on days I felt strong enough to. But it was another moment I could spend seeing you. I watched you striding across the parking lot when I heard it, a stifled laugh, one full of darkness and malice, and turned to see an old man also watching you leave. He turned towards me and smiled, and for a moment I almost rushed to embrace Jack before I realized Jack had died a long, long time ago. The eyes you see, its eyes are all wrong. Whether Jack had died in the woods or the beast in front of me somehow wore his skin, my brother no longer existed in this world. It returns to my room each night now, standing over my bed and whispering awful things while I scream. It tells me about where I go when I don't remember. Nightmares of burning cities and screeching metal. Do not come back to this place. Do not let it find you. It followed me from a land beyond the sea. But maybe when I'm gone, it will finally find someone else to hunt. I will love you forever, Grandma.